You know that feeling of dread you get whenever you hear a really creepy campfire story? The kind of dread that sends shivers down your spine and makes you paranoid of your surrounding? Well, chances are you might experience that feeling of dread while watching The Lighthouse, the latest unsettling horror movie from A24 Pictures. Brian, let me ask you a question real quick. Are you still shaking?
That was one of the most supremely disturbing and wild and go for broke bananas horror films I've seen in ages. And I've seen Midsommar, and I've seen The Witch.
Which was by the same director of this movie. I will say
this was Cocoa for Cocoa Puffs.
I think that was the most brilliant description I've ever heard for this movie. And I've read a lot of other critics' reviews, but let me just say this.
Yeah.
The sign of a good horror movie is when you walk out of the movie theater and everyone is just trembling and in utter shock of what they just saw. Mm-hmm. We experienced the same thing with Midsommar. When we left Midsommar, another horror film from A24 Pictures, there were people literally...
They're on a roll, guys.
Yeah, there were people literally running like down the hallway like out of fear.
Yeah.
And I saw the same thing tonight when we exited the theater for The Lighthouse. I really did.
People were crazy unsettled.
Yes. So a little bit of backstory. This is the sophomore effort from director Robert Eggers. He also helmed The Witch.
Which is a great movie.
The Witch was probably one of my favorite horror films of the past 5 years.
Mm-hmm. Same. Easily.
And what I really appreciate about Robert Eggers is, for one, he definitely has his own style, but he doesn't just go with what's popular in the horror genre nowadays. Like, he's much more interested like in his own unique vision.
Yeah. And also, the other thing I feel like he's interested in with both these movies is attention to detail. Mm-hmm. Because they're both period pieces, both of these films have very period-specific dialogue.
What went we out into this wilderness to find? Leaving our country, kindred, our fathers' houses.
Oh yeah, very period-specific and...
But point being, like, the attention to detail is pretty on point for this movie.
You can tell that Robert Eggers just loves the craft of film because he puts so much detail into his movies and just so much thought goes into them. And I just have to say, I still like The Witch a bit more than The Lighthouse, but he definitely succeeded again in making me feel unsettled.
I thought this was fantastic. If we're comparing it to how it holds up compared to The Witch, I'll need to see this one again.
Yeah, this is definitely a film that warrants a second viewing because while you're watching it, you're definitely feeling uneasy, but it's a film that sticks with you long afterwards, for sure.
Yeah. This is basically this is what the kind of film that I always really appreciate, because this is a film where it gives you just the bare minimum amount of details that you can understand what's going on. But otherwise, you can kind of take this movie as kind of like a Rorschach test a little bit, because I feel like every single person who watches this movie is going to have a slightly different take on it.
Tell me, what's a timberman want with being a wickie?
Just looking to earn a living, just like any man. Starting new.
On the run. Keeping secrets, are you?
Yeah, absolutely. And this movie is what I call an audience splitter because I don't think the majority of audiences will love this movie. I think it's going to kind of split people down the middle. But you know what? Honestly, that's okay.
That is absolutely fine with me. And I mean, we'll get into why later. I feel like the trailers actually kind of undersell the kind of movie this is, because even though it's in the horror genre, I feel like they don't really sell the feel of it.
There were a lot of different elements. There was fantasy, there was drama, there was comedy.
Honestly, that's sort of my take of the film is, I mean, obviously this film is a horror film, first and foremost, and one that wants to unsettle you, but the other, I feel like there's two movies in here. One is the horror movie. The other is kind of a comedy.
It really is.
I really feel like this movie is a comedy because I feel like subtextually this film is kind of about sort of a battle of dominance but between the two characters. And I feel like you can very easily take that into just sort of the hyper-masculine power fantasy. But I feel like this film is weirdly self-aware of its characters, and in a sense it kind of plays them for comedy. Like, you know how, like, a lot of people say some of Paul Verhoeven's films, like RoboCop and Starship Troopers, and
especially Total Recall.
Yeah, and me personally, I would say Fight Club also fits into that mold, where, in a sense, under the surface, they're kind of satires.
Yeah, yeah, they really are, because there was a good amount of humor in this movie. You know, not just coming from Willem Dafoe, who, I swear, this movie has as many fart jokes as your typical Adam Sandler comedy, but this is going to sound really weird, but the fart jokes do serve a purpose in making us, like, detest Willem Dafoe's character.
Yeah.
And real quick, one thing I'd like to mention is, one really good thing about this movie is you're constantly switching back and forth on, like, who you're siding with, because at first, you know, they're making Willem Dafoe really obnoxious, and, you know, he gets under your skin, like he gets under Robert Pattinson's skin, but, you know, throughout the rest of the movie, we just see Robert Pattinson gradually become more insane. Yeah. And Willem Dafoe suddenly seems like the reasonable one.
Yeah.
So and then
it keeps shifting. And then ultimately you kind of realize, this is kind of what I mean when I say the film is kind of self-aware and cuts its characters down in size. I feel like the film's conclusion is that both these characters, it's basically a battle of penis envy. a little bit. That's honestly how I took it, kind of.
Watch you spill your beans. Watch you spill your beans.
So Brian, do you want to give us the general plot of this movie?
Yeah. Okay, so takes place, I think, was this the 18th century or 19th century? I think this was 19th century, or where Willem Dafoe plays this lighthouse keeper. He claims to have been like a very famous ship captain and sailor, and so he very much fits kind of the Captain Ahab kind of mold of it, and to the point where he even, like Captain Ahab, he's even kind of speaking very much in this commanding presence, like he has this giant god complex, and he is in control of his domain here, and the plot of this movie is Robert Pattinson comes in. He has a mysterious past. He takes a job as a new lighthouse keeper, and so he's sort of the newcomer, and Willem Dafoe is basically having him do all the hard work, like shoveling all the shit and taking care of everything. But it's clear that both these guys hold secrets from one another, and because they're in this very kind of claustrophobic, confined setting,
oh my god,
the tension between them just keeps gradually escalating as the film goes on. That's the other thing that I wanted to mention. The claustrophobia of this very much reminded me of like The Shining.
Yeah, and especially the way that it was shot, because the aspect ratio
4:3
is a 4:3, and
it really added to that.
Not only does it make you feel as if you're looking at a portrait from that century, but you just feel trapped with these characters.
Yeah,
you just feel like there's no way out. And you mentioned earlier that this film kind of felt like a commentary on masculinity.
A little bit, yeah. At least to me.
I definitely felt that, and I don't want to spoil too much, but, you know, there were several instances where Willem Dafoe is putting Robert Pattinson down, kind of challenging his manhood.
And also, I feel like with the hard and dirty work that Robert Pattinson is doing in this film, and that he wants to be at the top of the lighthouse and see the domain that Willem Dafoe has built for himself, essentially, I feel like he feels very emasculated in that regard.
And again, not to spoil anything, but like, you know, when we reach the film's conclusion, let's just say that things have escalated.
Yeah.
And
into total fucking insanity. Is the best way I can put this.
This movie does an amazing job of just making you feel incredibly tense and just on the edge of your seat. And there are multiple times when I looked at you actually, and you're kind of like just kind of curdled in a.
Oh no! That final shot, my jaw dropped.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there are multiple images in this movie that will definitely stick with you.
Oh God!
Just like God, the camera setups are all meticulous. Like a lot of thought was put into each and every shot in this movie.
And the level of just surreal imagery, the way it traps you in these characters' minds, that's kind of what we mean when we say that's kind of another dimension of the claustrophobia. Like the filmmaking very much kind of puts you into their minds, and so there's just like this weird hallucinatory stuff that increases as the film goes on. And I have to ask, without spoiling, the stuff with the sea monster, is that what watching hentai is like?
Brian, let it be noted that Brian is asking me a question about hentai on this program. And Brian, let me say this. If you want to see the closest interpretation of hentai, at least in a Hollywood sense, watch the opening credits of Spectre, the James Bond movie.
Yes.
Where you have these tentacles just enveloping this female figure.
Yeah.
So Spectre and the Lighthouse, you're doing a really good job of bringing hentai to the big screen, Hollywood. Really good job.
4 years later, but
yeah. But overall with this movie, I just appreciate how it just puts the time and effort into scaring you. Mm-hmm. There aren't any jump scares, at least not that I can remember.
Oh, no, I honestly didn't count a single one.
You compared it to The Shining, and The Shining is another movie that was incredibly psychological. Mm-hmm. It gradually gets under your skin as you see these characters lose their sanity.
Mm-hmm. And I think I've said this before, but the lack of sort of supernatural elements, the fact that it kind of blurs the lines between that and the psychological elements, I think I've said this before on the show, that to me is the scariest thing you can do in a movie.
Compare something like this to It Chapter 2. It Chapter 2, which I enjoyed, I really did.
Yeah.
But it was more like a fun carnival ride. Mm-hmm. This, on the other hand, was much more visceral and
just it gets under your skin.
Oh, and both leads, Robert Pattinson and Willem Dafoe.
Robert Pattinson is a good actor, people.
Yes.
He is a damn good actor. I am sure he's going to make an excellent Batman. But anyway, back to this movie. Yeah, no, he is excellent in this movie. The level of just intensity he reaches. Honestly, obviously, this is going to sound like hyperbole, but just like the level of just intensity he had
and dedication
was reminding me a little of Daniel Day-Lewis.
Yeah, I can see that.
Mm-hmm.
Just the amount of dedication that he put into this role. Both him and Willem Dafoe, because I actually read some set reports that they did get at each other's throats a little bit. Apparently, they even got into an actual fist fight at one point. But when you see these characters, it's understandable because it's an incredibly tense situation, and it would make anyone just snap, basically.
And what you're saying, like there's moments where they get into fist fights sort of earlier in the movie where you're not sure if they're like messing with each other, or so that's another element where it's kind of blurring the lines, where it's sort of. And that's sort of another element to the comedy, I kind of thought, where they're just kind of messing with each other a little bit.
That and the fart jokes.
Yeah.
So, real quick note, and then Brian, I have one last question for you.
Yeah?
Between Philip the Goat and the Witch and the seagull in this movie, we now have two new horror animal icons because, goddamn, I never thought that a movie would be able to make me, scared of a seagull, but this movie did a damn fine job of it.
Mine.
So, Brian, will The Lighthouse go down as one of your favorite films of 2019?
Honestly, it probably will.
Oh, good.
I could honestly see this making my top 10.
Okay.
I dug this hardcore.
Did you like this more than Midsummer?
For me at least, I did, yes.
Okay.
And Midsummer was good, but
Yeah. Oh yeah.
but this just the weird kind of genre blend, just the impeccable acting, the craft, the mood, just the sheer go for broke. I really just dug the hell out of this movie.
How long have we been on this rock? 5 weeks? 2 days? Help me to recollect.
And I just have to say, as a fan of comic books and that whole genre, this film was kind of like the DC Marvel crossover that I'd always wanted, because you have Willem Dafoe, aka the Green Goblin,
And
you have Robert Pattinson,
as Batman.
our new Batman, who goes batshit insane in this movie.
Oh, there were a couple moments where I was just like, hashtag that's my Batman.
So yeah, The Lighthouse, we would both definitely recommend. It was a chilling experience. It's definitely not for everyone. It's a movie that you really have to study and just pay attention to. And yeah, I'll probably be having some nightmares tonight.
For real though.
Yes, but guys, those are our thoughts on The Lighthouse. Thank you so much for joining us. We were really excited to see this movie. A24 has given us some quality horror films.
They are on a roll this year, I think.
Between this and works like The Witch, It Comes at Night, The Monster, The Black Coat's Daughter,
Midsummer.
They're definitely on a roll for sure.
Yeah, for sure.
So Brian,
Yes.
are you ready to see Terminator 6, aka Terminator Dark Universe?
Terminator Dark
Knight.
Dark Knight Rises.
Dark Knight Rises. Dark Universe with Tom Cruise as the mummy.
Long live the Dark Universe.
Hey!